So Frieren, the anime that should have won Anime of the Year in 2024, has returned with its second season. Hopefully to win Anime of the Year in 2026. However, try as you might as you're heading into what is going to be a legendary second season of a fantastic adaptation of a beautiful universe. You can't seem to find yourself remembering all that many details of what happened in the first 28 episodes. And honestly, who could blame you? I mean, yes, were the first 28 episodes of Frieren absolutely iconic, 100%. However, over the course of those 28 episodes, a lot of characters are introduced and their powers work differently from each other. Their backstories are rich and complex. The power system is introduced. There's a tournament arc, character development arcs, and so much more. 28 episodes of content is still 28 episodes of content. That's a lot of video. And thus today, to hypothetically save some of you the time that it would take to either watch 28 episodes of anime or read the 60, yes, you heard that right, 60 chapters of manga that the first season covers of Frieren. Today, I want to go over everything that happened in season 1 so that heading into season 2, you're as prepared to enjoy this beautiful journey beyond Hero's End as much as possible. So without further ado, let's get directly into everything you need to know about Frieren before season 2. But before we get talking about what you need to know about 2026's Anime of the Year, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you guys are looking for one additional Nick video a week, guys, you can go ahead and find my Naruto reactions using the fourth wall link in my description below. Jiraiya is finally starting to figure out how to tell Naruto how to summon a big old toad. So Nick, are you going to be going over in your standard amount of detail about what happens in the first 28 episodes of Frieren so that we all have the best possible understanding of everything we could going into season 2? No, I'm not. I recently did a video called Everything You Need to Know About Hell's Paradise Before Season 2, where I just talked about the first 13 episodes of Hell's Paradise, aka Season 1, and that video was 41 minutes long. And while I would love to put a 2-hour video essay out talking all about Season 1 of Frieren and how great it is, I don't run a labor camp, and I genuinely believe that might kill Cody. It took us 3 months to put out the Konoha 12 versus 1A video. And thus, the breakdown of Season 1 that we're going to be talking about today is going to be highly detailed, but relatively concise. If you want every single detail of what happened in Season 1 of Frieren, well, go watch Season 1 of Frieren or read the first 60 chapters. Today, we're going to be mostly focusing on the characters that are introduced in Season 1, their motivations, and their backstories. And considering the fact that Frieren is a highly character-driven story, that's pretty much all you need. With that being said, let's hop right into it. Starting off with the first of 4 story arcs we're going to be talking about, the Beyond Journey's End arc. See, Frieren is called Frieren Beyond Journey's End because the entirety of Frieren's story takes place after what would usually be defined as the standard anime story. See, because the story begins at what is the end of an epic 10-year-long journey to defeat the Demon King of Frieren's world. We don't get to see the battle against the Demon King, we just get to see the party that defeated him. A party comprised of Frieren, an immortal elf, Himmel, a human warrior who's kind of deemed the leader of the group, Heiter, a drunk yet compassionate priest who acts as their healer, and Eisen, a stoic dwarf who acts as their tank. Now, at the conclusion of their journey, they return back to the city that had tasked them with the extermination of the Demon King in the first place. They receive their gold and their parade and their party for a job well done. And all of the mortals in the party, that being Heiter, Himmel, and Eisen, deem that the completion of this task is, well, enough work done for a whole life. However, Frieren, who's immortal and therefore this 10-year-long journey is but a blip in the ocean of her life, decides to leave the mortals of the group behind, vowing to see them once again in 50 years to watch the Era's Comet, which they watched after they defeated the demon. And while these 50 years passed in the blink of an eye, for Frieren, the humans in the group, these 50 years made up the majority of their lives. And thus when Frieren returned after 50 years, she was shocked by the fact that all of these young and spry and powerful people she had traveled with previously were now old and decrepit. And after her, Himmel, Heiter, and Eisen schlepped all the way out to a hill far outside of the city to watch the Era's Comet. Himmel passes away of old age. And it's at this moment that Frieren realizes that she barely knew him, and he might have been the love of her life. And thus the backbone of Frieren's entire story is built. See, because Frieren knows of a land to the far, far north of the continent that she lives on called Oriold, which apparently is the land of the souls, a place where people are able to talk to their deceased loved ones. And thus Frieren makes the resolution to travel all the way to the most northern part of her continent in order to speak to Himmel once again. And thus the journey after Hero's End begins. Now on this journey, one of the first things that Frieren does is seek out Heiter, the drunk priest from her former journey. And when Frieren does come across Heiter, we're introduced to the person who becomes the co-main protagonist of this story, Fern. See, Fern is an orphan whose parents were killed in a war in the southern part of Frieren's continent. And Heiter, who's stopped drinking and actually kinda found the way of God, uses the ending of his life, which he actually extends with magic, in order to trick Frieren into taking Fern under her care. See, Heiter tells Frieren in all of the magical books that he's collected over the course of his mortal life, and one of them there's a spell for immortality. And thus Heiter essentially tricks Frieren into spending years with Heiter and Fern, looking for a spell for immortality that Heiter knows doesn't exist. However, over the course of those years, Heiter tries to push Fern and Frieren closer together, until eventually Heiter decides that Frieren has once again reintegrated herself to live with mortals, and Frieren takes on Fern as her ward, at which point Heiter allows himself to die, no longer artificially extending his life, peacefully. Now, Fern is observant, disciplined, and an incredibly talented mage, and thus she kind of acts as the foil to Frieren's chaotic energy. And thus, over the course of chapters, basically like 4 to 13, the dynamic between Fern and Frieren is kind of just shored up. See, Fern wants to become a strong magician who can stand on her own, and Frieren's lifetime goal is to collect all of the magic this world has to offer. And therefore, in order to collect all of the magic this world has to offer, not only does Frieren have to hunt down magic in the most dark, damp, and obscure corners of the world, but also it means she has to master all of the magic that people would identify as useless, like magic that makes flowers grow, or magic that can clean your clothes, and so on and so forth. And for a while, it is just Frieren and Fern. That is, until eventually, Frieren's quest for all magic brings her to a solar dragon's nest. See, Frieren is in a perpetual hunt for grimoires, because grimoires have magic. And more specifically than anything, Frieren is trying to hunt down grimoires that originally belonged to Flom. See, Flom is a legendarily powerful mage who lived about 1,000 years ago in the Frieren universe. And Flom was unique amongst legendary magicians on account of the fact that she was human. However, on account of the fact that she was trained by the greatest ever living magician, Sein, who currently still to this day sits atop the magic world, because she, like Frieren, is an immortal elf, she, even as a human, had a pretty good chance at becoming a legendarily powerful magician. Now, Flom is also the person who was responsible for training Frieren in magic, and therefore was the person who got Frieren interested in the idea of collecting all of the magic this world has to offer, and the person who introduced the concept to Frieren of constantly suppressing your magical aura to trick demons into believing that you are weaker than you actually are, so you can catch them by surprise and kill them easier. Something that Sein and a lot of the other legendarily powerful magicians deemed as below themselves because they don't believe that they should have to resort to such underhanded tactics to kill things that they believe are under them, like demons. Anyways, Frieren's quest for an infinite amount of magical knowledge brings her and Fern to a village where a solar dragon lives. Because, like I said earlier, Frieren heard that there was a grimoire in the solar dragon's nest. However, after Fern fires a shot of magical power at the dragon and it causes no damage whatsoever, the two of them run away to the nearby village, where they're introduced to our third main character in this story, Stark, a boy who carries a gigantic axe who's deemed as the hero of this village because 3 years prior to Fern and Frieren's appearance in the village, the solar dragon had been rampaging through the village when it came across Stark, who stared the dragon down and caused it to retreat. At least that's what those in the village believed. In actuality, it's revealed that Stark only stared the dragon down because he was too afraid to move, and the dragon spared him on a whim. However, since the dragon hadn't re-attacked the village over the course of the 3 years that Stark had been there, the village treated him like their protector, and thus loved him. But when asked why he didn't just go out and kill the solar dragon, if seemingly the solar dragon was afraid of him, Stark revealed to Frieren and Fern that he was too afraid to ever fight it again. However, that didn't mean that he was shirking his training, as it was revealed to both Frieren and Fern that Stark had been basically cutting a mountain in half for years. See, Stark had actually been trained by Eisen, the dwarf who was originally a part of Frieren's OG squad. And Eisen trained him because he saw a vast amount of potential in the boy, but his own cowardice and second guessing of himself constantly made it difficult for Stark to achieve what he should have been able to. However, eventually, when push comes to shove, Stark was able to display his full level of strength against the solar dragon and cut it down with one gigantic chop of his axe. And thus, with his duty to the village now completed, Stark was free to join Fern and Frieren on their adventure. And thus, the romantic tension begins to build between the two age-appropriate characters on the party. Fern and Stark, that is. Frieren's like 1,100 years old. And the arc ends with Frieren, Stark, and Fern hammering out the path that their journey is going to take, as in order to get to Oriol, they're going to have to travel through a city by the name of Ende, which is how we get to the Aura the Guillotine arc. See, Aura the Guillotine is a high-ranking demon commander who previously served under the demon lord that Frieren killed, and Aura is leading an army of demons to try and siege a fortified human city. And it's not going well for the city. Their garrison is strained, they're on the verge of evacuating, and they don't really have anybody who's able to fight against Aura's elite demons, or Aura herself. And those are very appropriately numbered 3 key antagonists of this arc are Aura, the leader of the demon army, Lugner, and Linny. See, Aura's strength hinges on the fact that she has an insane amount of magical power. And whenever she has more magical power than somebody else, she's able to use something known as the Scales of Obedience. See, essentially, Aura is able to force anybody who has less magical power than her to obey her. And thus, time and time again, even when humanity's strongest defenders went out to go and try to defeat Aura, she was able to actually take them to fight for her side. Because anybody with less magical power than Aura simply becomes a foot soldier in her army. Lugner, who is Aura's lieutenant, prefers deception and ambush on humans to expose their weaknesses. And Linny, another higher-up demon in Aura's army, is a demon mimic who's able to copy the movements and techniques of the people that she's fighting against with a horrifying degree of accuracy. And thus the matchups for this arc are Aura versus Frieren, Lugner versus Fern, and Stark versus Linny. And the biggest theme of this arc is that demons are deceivers. They take on human appearance and learn human speech in order to deceive humans into either pitying them if they lose in combat or trusting them in the first place. However, if you thought this story was going to be like, well, listen, no, there's some good demons. Nope. All demons are deceivers. All demons are bad, and all demons need to be killed, specifically by Frieren, who's real demon racist. Demonist, if you shall. And thus it's in this arc that we begin to see the relationship between Frieren and Flom, her previous trainer. As Flom is the person who told Frieren that demons are going to try to deceive you, so you might as well deceive them by suppressing the amount of magical aura you put out. And thus this is what Frieren does. She goes out to fight against Aura, who upon seeing Frieren's relatively minuscule amount of magical aura, decides to activate her Scales of Obedience. But once she does, Frieren unveils her actual true amount of magical aura, which means in this battle of magical aura, Frieren massively outscales Aura, which allows for Frieren to deliver one of the coldest lines maybe in anime history, where she, now with Aura technically under her control and command, says, "Aura, kill yourself." To which Aura complies. And while Frieren's literally having an aura pissing contest with Aura, Fern displays her inability to be shaken, even by strong opponents, all the while firing off an amount of magic that no human could even comprehend to be physically possible. You see, Fern doesn't use crazy high-level magic. In fact, Fern only uses incredibly simple attack and defensive magic. However, Fern releases this basic defensive and offensive magic at a level that was previously thought to be impossible. Like, yeah, relative to a lot of other mages, she's only shooting 9mm, but it's firing at the speed of a minigun and the clip is infinite. And thus she's able to overwhelm Lugner, who massively underestimates how powerful she is. And as for Stark, he has to overcome the fact that Linny mimics his way of fighting, which he actually learned from Eisen, the dwarf. And upon realizing he's fighting against the fighting style of his own master, Stark has to grapple with his confidence issues until he realizes that, well, yes, Linny does have the ability to copy how Eisen fought. Linny doesn't have the ability to copy the lessons that taught Eisen how to fight that way in the first place. And thus Stark is able to see the flaws in the way that Linny fights and defeat her, hammering home the idea that mimicry and deception are only bad when demons do it. But with Aura defeated and the city saved, like the opposite of Zach Bryan, it's time to keep going north as I let you talk to your dead boyfriend real loud. Don't stop going north. However, unfortunately, keep on heading north. The party has to stop by in a little place known as Oberst, or it's got umlauts. I got chased out of Germany, at least my family did. Because unfortunately, to get all the way north on account of how dangerous it is in the northernmost part of the continent, because there's still demons up there, any traveling party hoping to go that far north needs to have a first-class mage with them. That is, somebody with a first-class mage's license. However, while on their way to Oberst to get the license that would allow them to travel really wherever they want on the continent, they bump into a talented yet struggling priest by the name of Sein. See, the reason that he's introduced is because Frieren's looking around at her party and realizing, oh, we have no healer. And sure, Frieren is trying to learn literally every different kind of magic there is, but holy magic is way better at healing than regular magic. and Frieren isn't really learning holy magic, and she's not good at it, and therefore when they bump into this incredibly talented healer and priest, Frieren's like, yeah, you should come with us, you should heal our boo-boos. However, Sein says no. See, apparently Sein as a youth had wanted to be an adventurer. In fact, he planned to go on an adventure with his close friend. However, when his close friend went out for an adventure, Sein actually decided to stay behind and support the village that they had grown up in. But this decision proved to be the wrong one. As for the rest of his life, he looked around at this village with contentment. The village was stifling his immense ability. However, with his friend now gone, out on an adventure, and maybe possibly dead already, Sein didn't have anybody else to push him out of the village. However, after Frieren, Fern, and Stark spend a little bit of time in Sein's village, they're eventually able to encourage him to find his nerve once again, and he's able to leave the village, traveling with the party all the way to Oberst. However, when they get to Oberst, Sein decides to not stick around. See, he doesn't want to take the magical exam, and he has no real reason to go to Oriol. And thus, upon gaining his separation from his village by making it all the way to Oberst, Sein decides that it was time to set out on the adventure that he had meant to set out on years ago, and goes off on his own to try and find his friend. Now, while all this is going on, there's a bunch of villages that Frieren and co pop into that remember Himmel with a smile on their face, and maybe more importantly than anything, we continue with the main through line throughout this arc, that every single interaction that Frieren has with humans reminds her of the time she spent with Himmel, and how even though humans are mortal and only exist for a small fraction of Frieren's infinite lifetime, cherishing these connections that she makes to the humans around her is incredibly vital. And thus she taps into that sentimentality by remembering Himmel and all of the good that he did for humanity. And thus by the time that the adventuring party makes its way into Oberst, some very clear character arcs have been established, and some, in the case of Sein, have already been completed. And thus it's time for our fourth and final story arc we're going to be talking about today, the First Class Mage exam. See, this arc starts with the idea that Frieren and Fern are entering into this exam, one, so they can gain access to all of the sealed routes on the path to Oriol, and two, because there's some libraries that are filled with an incredible amount of magical knowledge that only those with First Class Mage licenses are able to enter. And while Frieren and Fern are doing all of this, Stark is Starking it. I don't know. He's not really doing anything. Now, the First Class Mage exam is split into 3 stages. The first being a real Forest of Death, where randomly picked teams of 3 mages are thrown into a gigantic magical barrier, and inside of that gigantic magical barrier, they're told that in a certain amount of time, they have to capture an incredibly fast and small magical bird called the Stile, I believe. Once again, we weren't allowed in Europe. And while the idea of Frieren and Fern working together in the stage would have been incredible, they are split up because, like I said, the teams of 3 are chosen at random. Now, over the course of this first part of the exam, and I guess all parts of the exam, we're introduced to a whole bunch of new high-level mages. Yes, you have Frieren. Yes, you have Fern. We're also introduced to other personalities like Denkin, an old, seasoned human mage who was once a statesman mage, that is a mage who worked for the government, but who was burned by the politics that come with working in the government. And thus he wants to become a first-class mage, of which there are very few of, so that he can use the power granted to him with that license to correct the injustices that were done to him and his comrades, some of whom are imprisoned right now. We're also introduced to people like Ubel, who's a young magic prodigy who's able to cut anything magically that she fully understands. That is to say, let's say hypothetically you were using something like earth-based magic. Once Ubel realizes that she understands how your magic works, she can cut through it like butter. We're also introduced to characters like Methode, a second-class mage, who specializes in restraint and hypnosis magic, and the proctors of the exams, who are all already first-class mages, like Ganao, who's the proctor of the first part of the first-class mage exam, who's an incredibly cold-hearted and loyal to Serie mage, who doesn't care that the first class of the exam that he made forced a lot of mages to die in combat against each other. And eventually all of the mages who get introduced and given names are able to pass through the first part of the exam. And thus something like 12 or 15 mages make it to the second part of the exam, which is to reach the depths of a place known as the Tomb of the Ruined King. Basically, these mages have to either work together or work against each other to make it through a labyrinth, a magical labyrinth. However, the problem is this magical labyrinth is protected by a thing known as the Spiegel, and the Spiegel has the ability to conjure illusory doppelgangers. That is to say that the Spiegel has the ability to make copies of you that fight against you. And thus every single one of the mages that makes their way into the tomb of the ruined king ends up having to fight against copies of the mages that made their way into the tomb of the ruined king. And thus through a series of traps, wrong turns, and high octane battles, a lot of the mages that did enter into this second phase are taken out. However, because the proctor of the second phase of this exam is substantially less cold-hearted than the proctor of the first part of this exam, every single one of the mages that does enter the tomb of the ruined king is given an earth golem that they can summon that turns into a gigantic monster that carries them out of the tomb immediately. But the biggest problem that presents itself is the fact that at the true depths of this tomb, in order to protect itself, the Spiegel has summoned a doppelganger of Frieren, who is obviously much more powerful than all of the other mages in this exam. However, because Frieren is able to keep Frieren occupied, and because Fern is such a good student who's figured out the mastery behind concealing her mana, Frieren is able to keep the clone of herself occupied long enough for Fern to hit the doppelganger of Frieren with a Zoldtrock with all of her mana poured into it that's able to take out the doppelganger. My light died. We then pass on to the third part of the exam, which is just an interview with Serie. And because Serie doesn't like Frieren, Frieren establishes that there's basically nothing that Frieren could say to Serie that would cause her to pass Frieren. However, that's not the case for pretty much the vast majority of people who do make it to the third part of the exam, because Denkin, Ubel, Bethode, Land, and Werble all get passed by Serie. Now, we didn't talk about Land, but he's a mage who uses clones of himself, or Werble, who's the head mage of the Northern Magic Corps, so he's basically like a militaristic mage, but they're not like crazy important to the plot. However, the reason that Fern is passed by Serie is because Fern, unlike everybody else who looked at Serie's magical output, was able to detect the instability in her magical wave. Something that Serie was doing intentionally to check the magical detection ability of all of those she was interviewing. And Serie was so impressed by Fern's ability to do this that she actually tries to recruit Fern as her apprentice, telling Fern that she'd be able to make her achieve magical heights that no human had ever achieved before. But Fern stays true to herself and tells Serie that she's already Frier's apprentice, and with respect for her resolve, Serie decides then that she can pass Fern. And now with a first-class mage in the group, Stark, Frieren, and Fern can legally continue their journey north to Oriole. And that is where episode 28 of season 1 of Frieren leaves us story-wise. So what did we learn today? Demons are bad, Fern shoots fast, Frieren's stronger than she lets on, and Stark, well, he's got the world's best animated coat. Denkin, Methode, Ubel, Werble, Land, and all of the proctors we saw from the exam are first-class mages now, and therefore, as they are first-class mages, they're the only people that we'll probably be able to interact with for the continuation of Frieren's story, because the continuation of Frieren's story happens above the line that only first-class mages and those accompanying them are able to cross. And oh yeah, demons are bad. And with all of that information jammed into that pretty little head of yours, you are about as prepared as I am willing to make you for season 2 of Frieren. So I'm curious to hear from you guys. What are you most excited to see in season 2? Are you hoping to get more Fern and Stark content? Are you excited to see Frieren get stuck in a mimic? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Excuse me, I'm going to a hot springs resort. Dive out.